Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling a Readings Through the Deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem with Husky-Haughty lips, O.C. This is poem number 22 of the 58 of Sands at 70 here. We're back to the Navesink 8 poems. We're back to the Sea Drift poems. And we also will find one more reason why we have called our conversations here Talks with Walt. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, and that you've been with us from the very beginning. Obviously, you were with us for the Sea Drift poems, and we gave a set of introductory comments to Sands at 70 that I'm hopeful that you are as well familiar with. We just finished with Election Day 1884. Now, our Nortons will actually give us quite a bit of background information about this poem. First published in Harper's Monthly, March of 1884, it paid Whitman $50 for this poem. The poem is a record of Whitman's visit to Ocean Grove, New Jersey for a week with John Burroughs in September and October of 1883, when he jotted down some of its phrases in a 13-page notebook. Several trial lines were also penciled on a page with letterhead reading Sheldon House, Ocean Grove. 4 more pages record variants and the final draft. One discarded title is By Thine Own Lips, O.C. Whitman's remarkable sequence of fancies at Navesink, which we have done recently, above, may also have been influenced in part by this holiday. Burroughs, from the diary of September 29th, referring to a walk on the beach, noted, quote, "There is something grainy and salient in him, as in the voice of the sea. Sometimes his talk is elliptical and unfinished. Again, there comes a long, splendid roll of thought that swings you quite free from your moorings," end quote. And this reference, by the way, is one of the reasons we call this Talks with Walt, this series. By the way, at line 4, it was added after magazine publication for the 1888-89 text that we will be working with. So now as we turn to this, I want you to pay attention to the powerful personification of the sea. Makes us think, obviously, of any number of other romantic poets. Byron's Childe Harold's Pilgrimage comes to mind immediately. But we're going to ask, does he overdo it in your estimation? Many have pointed out that sometimes Whitman can have a tendency to take this personification project a little too far. I'm going to leave it to you to decide. This is often considered, by the way, the strongest poem of Sands at 70 collection. You'll remember that Husky was used in Song of Myself 36, Husky voices, and you'll remember that Haughty was used in As I Pondered in Silence, the very beginning poems, I Too Haughty. With husky-haughty lips, O sea, where day and night I wind thy surf-beat shore, imaging to my sense thy varied strange suggestions. Again, the influence of nature on Whitman is prodigious through Leaves of Grass, isn't it? And then the 4th line that has been added. I see and plainly list thy talk and conference here. Again, one more reason for us to consider Talks with Walt as our playlist is called. You'll remember in Song of Myself 3, the talkers were talking the talk. You'll remember that, and we commented when we hit it there. And then he uses some language that almost reminds us of drum taps. Thy troops of white-maned racers racing to the goal, thy ample smiling face dashed with the sparkling dimples of the sun. Dimples gets used one time only in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. I find that remarkable. Thy brooding scowl and murk. Of course, we're familiar with the word brooding in Leaves of Grass. Thy unloosened hurricanes, thy unsubduedness, caprices, willfulness, obviously the identification with the sea in this regards for Whitman, and then don't notice your 3s as well there. Great as thou art above the rest, thy many tears, alack from all eternity in thy content. Think about Wordsworth's The World is Too Much With Us, when he says, this sea that bears her bosom to the moon, that winds that will be howling and all are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For everything we're out of tune, it moves us not. I think certainly there's some of that echo going on here. And then he says, in parenthetics, not but the greatest struggles, wrongs, defeats, notice the 3, could make thee greatest, nor less could make thee. In other words, it's always going to be for the hymn about the ocean. The struggles, the wrongs, the defeats. Here we are back to our theodicy. Why must bad things happen? Why must there be struggles? Why must there be wrongs? Why must there be defeats? I think intentionally he uses the term troops early on to remind us the greatest question for him, the theodictic question for him, is the question, of course, of the war. Why must there have been this terrible, horrific war that obviously involves struggles, wrongs, and defeats? Thy lonely state. Now, the personal identification begins to happen. And obviously, we've said this, Whitman in his older age began to identify with the loneliness of having to be incapacitated, couldn't walk as well, and he couldn't get out, see people like he loved to. Something thou ever seekest and seekest, yet never gainest. In other words, it's like the ocean and the waves are constantly looking for something, longing for something, but never quite getting there. Surely some right withheld, some voice in huge, monotonous rage of freedom lover pent. Now, it's at this point, some people say, the personification is going a little bit too far, but notice that it's almost as if you imagine the sea longing to escape its boundaries, freedom lover. Some vast heart, and then he uses an interesting simile, like a planet's chained and chafing in those breakers. In other words, he imagines all the planets in the solar system longing to break off and go do their own thing. By lengthened swell and spasm and panting breath and rhythmic rasping, the brilliance of the rhythms here, and rhythmic rasping of thy sands and waves and serpent hiss and savage peals of laughter and undertones of distant lion roar. Notice bringing serpent and lion together. And then in parenthetics, sounding, appealing to the sky's deaf ear, almost Promethean, right? That longing that Prometheus has, to scream at Zeus but not to be heard. But now, rapport for once. And again, his use of rapport we've commented on many times. A phantom in the night, we've commented on his use of phantom as well. Thy confidant for once. In other words, I understand the ocean. He says, I understand you better than anyone else. The first and last confession, again, we go back to his use of talk and conference. Confession of the globe, outsurging, and now it's muttering. We've seen this used already in Leaves of Grass. From thy soul's abysms, the tale of cosmic elemental passion, thou tellest to a kindred soul. And for those of you like, a kindred soul, I know I heard that somewhere. There's an echo going on here. You're right, how solemn as one by one, you'll remember from Drum Taps, I see behind each mask that wonder a kindred soul. And I think Whitman is intentionally playing around with the ocean and his drum tap poems. Why? Because I think he sees so many similarities, right? That American history for Whitman is in large measure defined almost like an ocean with swells, sometimes calm, sometimes these unbelievable waves, the turmoil of it all. And obviously he's seeking some kind of answer to all of this and identification. At 2a, I think he's arguing that the ocean is in many ways a perfect metaphor for the seeking, the searching, the poet, as well as the aging poet. But I think it's also a perfect metaphor for American history for Whitman. At 2b, we mentioned the personification. You get to decide if some of these lines are a little bit over the top. At 3a, well, I mentioned the world is too much with us. I'd like to, though, mention Beethoven's Sixth, the Pastoral Symphony, and go back and kind of listen to that while you read this. Of course, Beethoven working on that set of lines of music from 1802 to 1808. The power of that kind of music as it relates to a work of poetry like this. You listen to it, you tell me what you guys think. Finally at 3b, what are your feelings about the sea as a metaphor? Does it work for you if you're a lover of the sea? And if not the sea, what force of nature best represents you in totality? I think for Whitman, certainly the sea is probably his favorite way to think about it. And of course, Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking comes to mind for sure. Thank you.